My name is Marco Castillo, and this is a presentation on how to develop students' writing skills. Let's start. In this module, you will revise Tricia Hedges' amazing chapter on what you should know in order to help students develop their writing skills. These images represent the different types of ways we normally follow when producing written language. As you can see on the left, we sometimes write by hand, or in the middle you can see some hands typing on a keyboard or an electronic keyboard on a mobile phone. And also, we normally write following the format of a specific type of genre. In this case, on the right hand of this presentation slide, you can see a descriptive essay. And in order to write one, you need to know the different structure, all the different layouts, different pieces of text follow. At an essay, we clearly know we have to have an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. Right? Let's now continue by saying that early childhood education and primary level students, the considerations when teaching writing are totally different from those when we teach to adults or secondary level students and on. What happens is that with kids in early childhood education and primary level, their writing skills are more connected on forming letters and words, joining words together to start constructing short texts, and sometimes they do this by copying sentences. These students are often learning to write letters and words apart from just learning to write in English, and this is something we need to bear in mind when teaching at these ages, between maybe 4 to 7 or 8. But at the secondary level, students need to focus more on other kinds of accuracy and communication skills, which are required to write longer texts such as letters, emails, and compositions. And on the left, you see a little girl who's learning to write the letters by following examples. Maybe a dotted line, who knows? But you can see that she's looking at a model on the left and she's trying to replicate this on the right. With more adult learners, this is a textbook that is normally used for writing, and you can see that some units or modules take different objectives. For example, module number one is more focused to developing accuracy, and this is why the contents take the learners to write a fact file by taking into consideration some punctuation issues. Second module, on the other hand, the emphasis is put on cohesion and accuracy. So the main topics for this module is on linking ideas in a narrative and linkers, but, so, because, and then. Right? So cohesion, but also accuracy. Other modules are more connected to text types, as you can see in module 4 or 6 and 7. For example, in module 4, the genre is important text types, right? And in this case, the module is taking the learner to write an invitation, a letter of invitation, whereas module 6 is more connected to writing a postcard, and module number 7, a mini biography. Now, the following series of slides sees writing as a process and takes for granted the fact that students already know to form letters, words, and sentences in their first language. What do we know about the process of writing? Well, the first thing is that writing is the result of employing strategies to manage the composing process, which is one of gradually developing a text. It involves setting goals, generating ideas, organizing information, selecting appropriate language, making a draft, proofreading, editing, and publishing. And what strategies do skilled writers use as they compose? In the 1970s, some studies started to be done in order to understand how a piece of writing comes into being. A piece of writing is the outcome of a set of complicated cognitive operations, and these studies drew a number of findings. One of them, in number one, is that planning was not a single phase but a thinking activity to which writers returned again and again. In number two, thinking or writing down whatever is in their minds was a part of the observation. So some writers were observed while composing a piece of writing. So was it that they thought more than they wrote? What is it that they did at the beginning? Did they stop and thought what they were going to write, or they just started writing down, putting on paper what was in their minds? So what happened with the skilled writers is that they were observed that they had individual strategies for getting into writing. Some of them wrote notes or lists or diagrams, and all of the students spent a good deal of time thinking at the outset. But some of the best writers wrote nothing down until they started. In number three, we have that writing is a recursive and generative process. The writing process was recursive and generative, with students rereading their work, assessing it, reacting, and moving on. There was an interesting distinction between the poorer writers or the poorer students who seemed to focus on rereading only smaller chunks of discourse, and better writers who sometimes reread whole paragraphs. Some more findings report that the writing process requires revisiting the written text. Number 4. Revisiting took place throughout the process and generally involved considerable changes. For example, composing something new, deleting sentences, and shifting paragraphs around, and sometimes eliminating them. In number 5, making improvements to surface level features such as, I'm so sorry for this, there is a typo, grammar, double M, grammar or lexicon used, for instance, at specific times. So when was a good time to pay attention to surface level features, checking on grammar or lexicon? All of the writers in this study paid attention to surface level features, but the better writers dealt with these at the end of the process. It was the poorer writers who spent time throughout the process changing words and phrases. In number 6, linguistic problems seemed to concern the writers least. The better writers used strategies such as leaving a blank or writing down a word in their own language in order not to be distracted as they developed ideas. And finally, edition is the final step. Once ideas had been written down and developed, the writers began to edit for surface level features. As I said before, in number 5, grammar and lexicon was checked at the end of the process. Not only grammar, but also word choice, spelling, and punctuation. In another study, reported in 1985, the findings suggest that experienced writers consider purpose and an audience. They consult their own background knowledge, they let ideas incubate, they plan as they write, they read back over what they have written. Contrary to what many textbooks advise, writers do not follow a neat sequence of planning, organizing, writing, and then revising. For while a writer's product, the finished essay, story, or novel, is presented in lines, The process that produces it is not linear at all. So this picture here represents a somewhat linear way of working or producing writing. It's not fully linear. It's somehow, as you can see, curved because, as you saw before, experienced writers tend to come back and revisit previous sections and deal with concerns of grammar, lexicon, punctuation, spelling at the end of the process. In the middle, as you could see here too, in number 3, the writing process is recursive. So skilled writers are normally or tend to come back to different places in the writing to delete, replace, move paragraphs around from here to there, as you heard me before. And yes, this kind of shows what everybody does when writing, normally by identifying an audience, defining the purpose, thinking what to write, thinking about what features to discuss, gathering the ideas, if it is important to search for these ideas or look for more information on textbooks, the internet, databases. This is the time to do it. Pre-writing activities in a way, right? Reading and annotating those ideas that were found on the literature, and starting to generate ideas by free writing, putting on paper what's in people's minds, in writers' minds, and outlining, meaning giving a little sense of structure, what comes first, what comes second, third place, and so on and so forth. The next step is drafting, which considers in a way how to organize the information that was obtained in the beginning or previous process, giving it a sequence, some kind of organization, rethinking if it's needed, supporting when it's needed too. Supporting means finding more information that supports ideas that come from writers' minds, especially useful when writing for academic purposes, like in an essay or a report, for example. Being concise in terms of word choices, right? We need to avoid using words such as thing, something, right? We need to be more specific and use or make use of the actual words we want to use. And having a sense of audience is going to give us a clear idea of what kind of language to use, and setting up goals is also going to help us direct our piece of writing more straightforwardly. Now this process here is to be done, as you can see, in a recursive way. You should start doing something and come back to that something later on in the process. Okay. The next part is editing. Right after you have a draft, then you may want to edit it. Maybe you had someone who provided feedback and raise your awareness as a writer that you made some mistakes in grammar, punctuation, or spelling. So this is the time after those comments were given. This is a time for you to edit those problems or mistakes. Sometimes editing also considers not only the surface level things such as grammar, punctuation, and spelling, but also the formatting or the format of the entire piece of writing. And if you're writing an essay or some kind of dissertation paper, in-text citation, using APA standards, for example, is quite important to be, successfully covered in the edition part. Yeah, there you go. And finally, it's time to publish either to your to your class, to your teachers, and things like that. What activities characterize their writing process? As we could see in the previous picture, we have about 6 different steps to deal with. The first one is planning, and in here we have activities like setting goals, finding and supporting information or evidence, generating ideas, and seeing their connections. Another activity is number 2, organizing information, deciding a text structure, what comes first, second, third, okay, in this text. Number 3, selecting appropriate language, which means that this written piece of text needs to be produced with a reader-based prose, which means that this is found on one of those studies we were discussing before. Good writers are sensitive to the audience they are writing. So if you put on your audience's shoes and write accordingly, then you might succeed in producing reader-based prose. Drafting a piece of writing is important, as that is going to be like the main structure to later provide some revisiting, proofreading, and editing to finally publish it, hand it in to your teachers or other people who are supervising these products. What are the implications of a process approach? Well, teachers must help students gain control over cognitive strategies involved in composing aligned to the stages of such process. So you may want to consider helping your students to generate ideas. And a way to do this is by putting them to work in pairs and to start discussing on a topic you want them to develop on a piece of paper later on. So maybe you want them to clarify doubts, and this could come up after some pair work has been done. You may want your students to follow certain instructions, so guided techniques can also be used here by providing clear instructions, questions to be answered and reported, or an unguided approach, which means eliciting ideas and mind mapping them, right? Number 3, another thing you may want to consider when developing or designing activities for writing is that one of planning. So we now know that planning is really necessary at early stages, especially with low-level students. Plans need to be flexible and they can change at any time. So this is something you should transmit to your students as well. Eliciting mind mapping and sequencing of ideas, guided note-taking, and more strategies can be found on Tricia Hedges' book, page 311. Another type of activity you may want to consider is contextualizing tasks to develop a sense of audience, which means that tasks need to have a context, like writing letters to family members, or writing to a magazine looking for answers, or the newspaper, or pretending something. So the idea is that all of your writing activities are associated to a specific context. It's not just obvious for everyone to assume that when you ask them to write a piece of writing, they are thinking on the same context you have in your mind. So you must make it clear for everybody to think of the same thing. For example, as you could see here in some of these examples, if you are asking them to write a letter, maybe you want to specify to whom, right? You're going to use a specific vocabulary when you communicate ideas to people who are close to you, as opposed to writing to a boss or someone in authority. So that type of writing is going to be using more formal or sophisticated language, right? So that context is important for your writing activities. What are the implications of a process approach? This is point number 5. Encouraging students in revision strategies is also to be done. Some useful checklists can be found on Tricia Hedges' book on page 314, plus some reformulation strategies. I invite you to look at that page, please. And in number 6, we've got supporting students with technology. Ever since the existence of computers, we know that there are important software or softwares that we normally use when writing. The most famous one is word processors like Microsoft Word, right, in which handwriting is assisted. Some good things about using Microsoft Word when writing is that whenever you feel like moving ideas from one place to another, you just copy and paste them and place them in their new place, right, in their new location. But if you wanted to do the same thing on a piece of, a physical sheet of paper, what happens is that you start, deleting things, and the piece of paper damages, and of course it doesn't really look appealing maybe right after erasing, so one good way of using Microsoft Word or word processors is that it keeps the environment clean in a way. Generation of ideas and rapid noting in many or in any order is okay. Cutting and pasting fixes everything. Yeah, this is a characteristic I was referring to about Microsoft Word, for example. And drafting is also possible with such options too. Some issues. Time for writing needs to be provided in the supported learning environment of the classroom. This is why you need to plan carefully in your, planning for the semester. You need to plan to allocate time for your students to go over the different steps, generating ideas, planning, drafting. Maybe you want to have a look at their drafts and give them comments for them to later edit that before submission. So there is a need for revision to be supervised by you, the teachers. Spending more time at early stages is suggested too, allowing more freedom with better writers. And the more practice, the better, of course. Many students benefit from structured tasks. For example, let's do this activity, and the activity now we know it's about planning. Let's do this activity which is about drafting something right after planning. So if we do this, then we can continue with the next one and the next one, right? In large classes, group writing may help collaborative writing exchanges, context for writing. Well, in this presentation, we are clearly more focused on here because it's part of our next evaluation too. So I really need you to pay attention to these different stages, the 6 stages I showed you before, so that you generate different activities for each of these stages. Of course, I've got 3 here, but it's a total of 6. How can we analyze and describe the structure of written texts? Well, a product approach to teaching writing can be done, which means that in such an approach, you tend to analyze types of text to raise awareness of how they are organized. Models or examples are to be shown, analyzed, and used for reference. The purpose is to focus a student's attention on the features of texts for them to be able to produce them accurately. So what is this structure approach or product approach to teaching writing? It's kind of looking at the text and working from a text as a piece of example that represents the type of writing you want your students to produce, starting from looking at one, reading one, and then developing on students' awareness about the structure this type of text has, the type of vocabulary it uses, the way paragraphs are constructed. So it's by looking at a product, finished product, and analyze it. Whereas the process approach is a bit the other way around. You want to go from one step to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, until you finish with a final product. That is the process approach. But a product is one which starts from a final finished product, and you start analyzing that with your students. The recommendation is always to mix both approaches, the process approach and also the product approach. So in your next evaluation, the design you will have to produce for this class needs to combine both of them. My recommendation is to, whatever thing you want your students to produce, you should start from that, showcasing the text that you want them to produce. So if it is an essay, the first activity should be about a topic that is connected to an essay you already have as a teacher, as a teacher who wants to show your students. So I always recommend to start with a model, an example, right? So let's imagine that this is an essay. The first thing is to think about the topic of an essay. Later, show your students the essay, the example essay you have. Analyze the essay with your students, the way it is structured, what is such and such a paragraph doing for the complete piece of writing, and then take them to more detailed analysis, let's say language or grammar, specific grammar, or maybe the linkers and punctuation, to finish later on with an activity that shows or asks students to produce their own piece of writing. So if you think about this sequence, you start from a very product approach to teaching writing because you show them a model, but later on you started giving them some input that was taking them to the different processes we need to consider when writing. And yeah, I forgot mentioning that there should be a place for organizing, a place for editing, and so you need to make sure that that is to be shown. In class, we are going to analyze and see how this can be done, and I'm going to show you an example with the help of an LMS that you were invited to see last week. Okay, so I hope that you can meet me in the class and see this analysis or these examples to analyze them together. Okay, goodbye.